So that has to be done. So the point is that prayer is obvious, because prayer is about, we're reaching out towards God. It's interesting. I just saw this statement in the Steinsaltz Tanya, which is, I think I can recommend it to everybody. Let's see. You're interested? I just bought this book, was on sale. Well, it's, yeah. So Steinsaltz Tanya. It's on sale in a local bookstore. But anyhow, just quickly looking at it, he mentioned something about, something that we all, of course, understand is that, so God created the world with his speech, in a certain sense, metaphorically speaking, but the essence of speech is the idea of, I will something. It's a creative power to communicate outside, but the speech itself is kind of, it's part of me, but it's almost non-existent. The breath coming out of my mouth and so on, it's almost nothing vis-a-vis my being. So similarly, the whole world compared to God's being is just speech. It's the communication of a desire and a thought to the outside, but it in itself is really nothing. So that's what the world is. So now I hope that makes you feel better. Now that you know what you are, people, all right? Put you all in your place. You're a bunch of words. That's it. Okay, but you're God's word. That's saying quite a bit. But anyway, he finishes up by saying human beings are the only ones who can respond. So we're all kind of spoken to in a certain sense. Only human beings speak back. So that's prayer, right? That's what prayer is. But charity is even a higher level, as we know. Charity saves from death. Charity is something extremely special, and the truth is that charity ties into a certain Chabad principle, which is called self-sacrifice. How self-sacrifice touches on our very essence in a way that other things don't. And the fact is, we all know that money is it. Money is key. Most people, they can talk. What do they say? Talk is cheap. Well, surely it doesn't cost as much as money. I mean, it's not money. When it comes to asking, you may have encountered this with a friend or acquaintance or a boss. You talk, you go out, and you can share things with people, but suddenly you say, I'm really having a tough time. I need a loan, or I need a few dollars. Very often, not always, but very often you find suddenly people don't want to hear that, and they may disappear, find a way to change the subject. All of a sudden, they're not interested. And why is that? I mean, it's quite obvious that because money really touches on our ability to live, our ability to be free, our ability to function, our ability to take care of ourselves in our old age. So by giving that, it's even in the small, the more a person gives and pushes the envelope to the point where, because we all feel like, I don't really want to give this much. And if we push and we give a little bit more than we feel like giving, that's really self-sacrifice. And it's also a tremendous sign of faith, that I'll trust in God. He wants us to give, and it'll be okay. Because, I think most people have to tell themselves that. No, don't worry. Unless the person's a millionaire or a billionaire and they're giving money that it's, it doesn't, no problem. But, and the same thing, if I give $1 to charity, that has value, because I could take that dollar and buy myself, some chocolate. That would taste a lot, I don't get giving it to someone. So I'm just, and physically, it's just a loss. You know what I mean? Unless for people getting honor from giving charity, and that's problematic, because that could ruin the whole mitzvah of giving charity. But putting that aside, when you give charity, you're giving money. Usually we're used to giving money as an exchange. I get something physical in return, some type of physical satisfaction of some kind, whether it's food, clothing, shelter, but something I'm getting, entertainment. So yeah, it's valuable to give $1. But when someone pulls out of their pocket $50, that's already, that's a significant, or $100 or whatever it may be. They're really pushing it. They're pushing the envelope, as far as how much they can give, and they give more. And that can, what's interesting is that in again in Tanya, the author of the author of the Tanya, first Lubavitcher Rebbe, who was a disciple of the Maggid, who was the disciple of the Baal Shem Tov, the chief disciple of the Baal Shem Tov. He talks about how charity not only draws down physical blessing, but spiritual blessing also. That it can open up a person's mind, in their prayer and all different ways, because in other words, charity breaks the bonds. But let me return to, I get a little bit off course. So I wanted to say is that charity is a form of self-sacrifice, and self-sacrifice is a form of servants that's really, puts we're putting ourselves on the line. And in that sense, it reveals our very essence. It reflects a form of giving of ourselves that other things don't. We can give a certain talent, okay, whether in all different mitzvahs, the different talents, the different abilities that it may reflect, different character traits. But charity is everything, because it's me. That's money I could have lived on, and I gave it up. And so that's putting myself completely out there. It covers my whole being from top to bottom. It sanctifies my whole being from top to bottom. And that's why it's so special. So, look, it doesn't matter how much, but if we're pushing the envelope, or if I can only afford $1 and I give $2, that's enough already. If someone is more, or they could afford $2, I always think of it this way. Isn't it interesting that, when they ask for charity in the synagogue or whatever it is, it's so hard to give that $1. But when I walk past, in the morning before work, when I want to get a cup of coffee, I want to get myself something, I pull out a $20 bill, no problem. I don't hesitate. I don't think, maybe I don't need to buy this junk food with this $20 bill. No, I just buy it, right? I don't even think, that's not a waste. I don't even think about it. So, I think we need to think long and hard about that point, how we easily pull out much bigger sums, on other things, and charity, it's a lot harder. Smaller sums we feel are enough. In reality, if we look at it and we say, wait a minute, but isn't a mitzvah the most important thing in my life? And, and giving to other people the most meaningful thing in my life. So why is it that I only give like the shreds? Like I only give what's left over. I'm not saying anyone is doing this. I'm just saying it's a common way of behaving that we all need to look at to a certain extent. Why is it like, this $1 I can afford, like I don't need it, or, but when it comes to, let's go out, restaurants, get some sushi. I just blew $50. 60, 70, $100, and I'm not that worried about it. Some people are, but I'm just saying, and so I think it's just as much that a person should give, that the charity is also one of the things that we do that costs a little bit of money, but it's important. It's not just, whatever is left over, but something we should put aside for. And I think that's the whole thing of giving a tenth, which the custom, there's different opinions, whether for a Jew, if that's the halacha, or it's it's just a custom to give a tenth for charity, but it's it's something we should think that this is something I'm putting aside. This is something that something I need to do as a part of where my money should go in my life, and that's it. That's my take on that. So repentance key. First of all, person has to get themselves away from. It's like addiction. Any sin is kind of similar to addiction. As long as you're in it, you're kind of sick. You have a kind of a sickness. And so the person has to try to, pull themselves away from that. And that's a difficult thing to do in the first place. To get past the first level is probably the hardest. Prayer is, we can pray, prayer, and I find prayer sometimes really hard too. I don't know. But nevertheless, prayer, I think, is easier than the first part. First part is changing ourselves, changing habits that are well set in. It's quite hard. And the older we get, the more difficult it has become to make changes. And a lot of things about ourselves we already assume can't be changed. In other words, let's say we have a certain character trait. For example, maybe people, are not outgoing. Maybe someone is just not, I don't know, I'm trying to think, not a big studier. Hard for them to study the books. For someone to think that, you know what, I really wish I did know how to study better, and really just pull themselves to, and think I can change. I mean, usually at a certain age, we just don't do that anymore. Obviously, but basically what I'm saying is, let's say someone is not fighting with a really destructive behavior, whether it's, it's some type of, let's say it's not a really bad character trait like anger, okay, or depression. These are tough things too, very tough things to beat. But the beginning is just disciplining oneself, and so that boils over into other areas. The point is, in areas where you can exact more, a Torah-dic lifestyle in your life. For example, saying blessings. Okay, it's a great example. A ben Noach can say blessings. Blessings is a certain level of discipline before eating. Making a blessing before all different types of things in your day. Obviously, the morning blessings. By doing that, it brings a little bit of order immediately into your life. And obviously, it makes you a God-conscious person. So that could, help just make you increase your level of discipline. Okay. Anyway, so that's pretty much, I go on and on, but I want us to get back to our regular study. But I just wanted to share these coming weeks a little bit about talking about Elul, talking a little bit about what's upcoming, and now we have to try to prepare. And the idea that their Rizal said that, but this is assumption that if somebody really gets there, they end up, crying on Rosh Hashanah. And the idea of that is a kind of an ego breaking event, which is very hard for us to reach nowadays. But in other words, coming to the point where a person really feels, oh my gosh, how have I lived my life? I can't believe I'm just, it's just a very deep bitterness about the mistakes, getting to a place where just to feel horrible about what the person did, and it's a hard place to feel that level of regret, and yet control it where that doesn't turn into depression. That's the thing. How do we feel a bitterness and a deep regret, which seems to be an important, very, very important part of the repentance process? As I'm saying, the person wants to reach the atonement, those, coming to tears could be a very important part. And we really find it hard in the West nowadays to show that kind of emotion. We're not used to showing emotion very much, But like I say, to get to that place where a person really does feel just so kind of disgusted with myself, where I just feel so much regret. I just feel so much like there's a void, there's a hole of what I did in my life. I can't, I'm so upset about it, the way I lived. And yet not to get depressed and fall into, I think it's difficult, very difficult, and something we don't know how to do very well. Okay, anyhow, that's it for now. Okay. So we're in the mitzvah of knowing God, because it's an actual mitzvah to know God. And this is a mitzvah that applies both to Jews and non-Jews. The verse says, in Deuteronomy, and you should know today, and you should place it upon your heart, that the Lord is God, right? There's no other. And that's from this verse. It says, you should know. You should know. So you should know about God. You should come to knowledge, what he's all about, and the fact that, and he's unity. The idea of his unity. And really, if you think about it, if there's this mitzvah to know his unity, and it's so important for human perfection to know God's unity, it may explain why we have suffering and conflicts and difficulties in life. Because doesn't that play a role in knowing God's unity? In other words, what does unity mean? The good, the bad, like just like let's look, we had some of you very precious students brought the verses from last week, from Isaiah. Was it David? Last week, I'm trying to remember who it was. How God creates both the light, the darkness, and the evil, and everything. As Isaiah says in the verse that's quoted in the daily prayers, mostly, at least it's paraphrased in the daily prayers. But the point is to get to know that God's unity means everything's coming from him, and it's all one body of thing. It's not disjointed. I mean, that's just on the lowest, most basic level of your understanding what unity is. To get to that, we have to face the conflicts and yet still remain steadfast that it's all unified, that it's all God's will, and in the end, it's all somehow makes sense. So in other words, there's saying things, going through, thank you, that's right, Isaiah 45:7, thanks, thank you, David. So there's knowing things, meaning to say academic knowledge. Oh, I heard this is said, and then there's knowing it, like really believing it firmly. And that's the knowledge that I think only through the test of life really we're putting to the test. Do we really believe in God's unity or we don't? And obviously we're in a dark place in which that unity is unclear to us. And we have to make ourselves, recreate ourselves into believers. So, okay. Let's see. Paragraph 7 on page 19 says, if there were many gods, they would perforce have bodies, because there is no way to differentiate one being from another except by bodily or material differences. If the Creator had a body or any material form, he would have both a limit and an end, and his power would have a limit and an end. Because it is not possible for there to be a body that has no termination point. And everything pertaining to a body also has a termination point. So since he would be limited, his power would be limited too. But because our God, blessed be his name, his power is endless, uninterrupted. The planet revolves perpetually, for his power is not a bodily power. And because he has no body, there are no accidents or occurrences of the body that happen to him, which might divide or separate him from another being. Therefore, it is impossible for him to be anything but one. So first of all, he doesn't have any feelings that differentiates him from others or any character traits that different. There's one thing that's big in Maimonides is there's the human emotion don't apply to God in the eyes of Maimonides. Of course, this begs the question, well, why does the Torah say God gets angry, God is happy, God loves? He doesn't have these qualities. Maimonides saw these qualities as a weakness and a deficiency and something that God can't have. Of course, the question is then what do the verses mean? And of course, the answer is, well, it's a metaphor. It's so that human beings should understand, but really God doesn't have these things. It's a little disappointing though, because then what do you mean? God doesn't love us? So what is he doing? He's close to us. He's very, very close, but it's not love. So what is it? So it's a little bit confusing or disappointing and other rabbis and other authorities disagree with the Rambam about this. Disagree with Maimonides about this point to a certain extent, and say, the truth is in Kabbalah it says expressly that God is completely unified with his character, with his traits, with his attributes, and his attributes have to do with loving. They are, wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, loving kindness, discipline, etc., etc., etc. So, compassion. So clearly, again, we have a contradiction, but it's a contradiction that we can at least feel comfortable with. And what is that? That's a kind of, we're saying that, no, God really does have all these attributes. They're godly versions of them that we can't really comprehend and that they're limitless. But at the same time, they do exist. Yes, God also is really, he himself, because he's completely unified with his attributes. He's loving kindness. He is wise and he is kind and all these different things, even though they're not the kind of kindness we can comprehend. They're way beyond. They're limitless and almost without definition. They're so amazing, but they are there. So, and what the Tanya says is the way we reconcile Maimonides with the Kabbalah is that Maimonides is talking about, God's, well, the level of wisdom alone, but he's not talking, because the Rambam says that God is intellect. Again, it's a little bit more, it sounds more Aristotelian than Kabbalistic. But the Tanya reconciles it. It says that the Maimonides, I think a lot of you in the class probably have heard this before. Anyone you've heard this before? Raise your hand if sounds familiar. No? Okay. So Maimonides focuses on the fact that God is intellect. Again, it's a very Aristotelian type idea of the world, and that the godly character trait is intellect. I mean, if you think about it, it's a little bit like it says in Genesis that man, was made in the image of God. What is an image? So many commentators understood that to mean man's intellect, that differentiates man from the animals. And that's the godly thing, is intellect. And in examining the world, it does have that appearance because, in other words, what is it that, yes. So what is the soul quality that makes man independent? Everything else in a human being pulls. Emotions kind of steer us in a certain direction. But how do we, in what way do we have our own hands on the steering wheel? It's really the way it appears to us is conscious, is through intellect. We can control our emotions. We control what we're doing. Otherwise, we're kind of washed away, kind of being drawn around by the different impulses that we have. An impulse is not directed by our ego. It drives our ego. It drives our consciousness. So the only thing that's really independent is intellect. And so when we examine the world, intellect seems to be the divine part. But in reality, the other character traits also have a divine origin. All right, but the point is that the way that the Tanya reconciles Maimonides with the Kabbalah is he says that, first of all, when Maimonides talks about God being intellect, he's talking about what? About the levels in which God, is one with the attribute of wisdom. Of course, the problem is Maimonides is not into God having any other attributes. So that seems to be the difficult point. Okay, let's continue. So the point is that we know God can't have a body. Why? Because a body is limited. And obviously, this is very, very much, it's a big consolation that God is not a body. Because if he was a body, we wouldn't have anything to do with him. You say we'd be separate entities, right? He'd be his own entity out there somewhere, hovering around, moving around, and we'd be here, he'd be watching us, whatever, but we'd be separate. And so we'd be back to the original question of, wait a minute, if he's there and we're here, and so if you take it back and take it back and take it back, we're like made of the same substance. Who made him? Who made us? And there's some other being out there. So he's not really the creator, The point is the creator can't have those kind of bounds, right? Because if he did, then he wouldn't really be the creator. Follow what I'm saying? I mean, we can give birth, a person can can reproduce, but to create, this is what I mean, to create something from nothing, another being can't do that. another bodily creature can't create something from nothing. Who can create something from nothing? Who can interact with nothing? Put it that way. How can you, mold nothing? Doesn't even, its words that make no sense. So I found a bunch of nothing, and then I kind of squeezed nothing together, and I turned the nothing into a round shape nothing, and then I formed it into different shapes of nothing. Well, that doesn't make any sense, because as long as it's nothing, it can't have a shape. I mean, it doesn't exist. I can have a shape of a nothing. If it has a shape, it's not a nothing, is it? Okay, am I giving everyone a headache yet? All right, so this is one point. I think that's, again, it's something that people don't understand, that the idea of the creator is this ex nihilo point of creating from nothingness. To create from nothing, you can't be a being within the system. If we can understand it, that isn't God. That's the key. If we get it, then it isn't it. And that's also like the atheists, they seem to miss the point. Like, well, we can't prove God. It's untestable as he doesn't exist. No, that's the proof right there, buddy. If he could be proven, then he wouldn't be it. Then he would be bound by the same rules. Makes no sense. How can you can't find God in a laboratory, because then he'd be bound by the very rules he's not bound by. If I can make a test and says, oh, this thing and this thing has such and such amount of this chemical and such and that and the other thing, and he's going to react this way and that way, that means he's limited. Everything in this world is bound by the laws of nature attached to it. And if you do an experiment and reacts in this way, shows that it's bound to react in that way. But God isn't limited. If you could find him in a laboratory, he's not God. So we can come to God by reason, which is reason still out there even? Does it still exist? Does anybody reason? Well, that's why you can learn God. See, that's what's great about being a Noahide. You could study some Gemara. You can actually get back to some reason. Pull out that Avodah Zarah, get that laws of idolatry Talmud section, and start studying. See what that's got to say. See if you can. There's Art Scroll. There's Steinsaltz. Check it out.
Rabbi, could I ask a question here?
Please.
Did I understand you to say that Maimonides believed the only attribute of God was wisdom? Did I hear that correctly?
Right.
What about when we've talked about before, Exodus 32:10, the 13 attributes of God? How does that reconcile?
It's a good question. Maybe I should be more specific, and there may be a little bit of a blank spot where I may not understand it clearly. But the Rambam believes that all human emotion that God doesn't have human emotion. He found human emotion to be weakness. You know what I mean? In other words, if I think about it, in other words, in its human forms, but he doesn't expressly in his work that I've seen, he didn't differentiate. But look, there may be some commentaries out there I'm not aware of. But the simple reading of the Maimonides is yes, that God doesn't love, because if I love, that means I need you. That means if you talk back to me, I'm going to be hurt. That can't be with God, because that means God is vulnerable, and he isn't, right? So, of course, at the same time, the problem with what Maimonides is saying, obviously, is the opposite, is that isn't it a deficiency not to be able to love? But again, he was very Aristotelian, and he kind of believed that all these traits were, they're just human and frail and folly. It's kind of similar to the way that people believed in the 19th century about women. Are you ladies perking up there? People believe that women were the emotional, that they were dominated by emotions, and therefore, that their judgment would be often clouded, and that, men should be in charge. So basically, and Maimonides agreed. In other words, it's an argument about the value of emotion. The value, Maimonides, it's all intellect. That's what it's about. Everything else is just animal instinct to the Rambam.
Then, Rabbi, what do we do with the verses about Noah where it says God was grieved or repented or...
All metaphors, not literal. According to the Rambam, none of them are literal. It can't be because, like as I said, because that would be a weakness, a deficiency. Since God has none, they can't be literal. It simply means that God responded in a certain way. He appeared as if he had this. It's a way of communicating. You can almost say to say it's theatrics would be horrible, and it can't be, but it's kind of God communicated with man in a way that made him feel as if God was doing this because, or another way of saying it is, it doesn't mean literally what it says, just the same way that speech isn't literal. We all understand that God isn't speaking and there's no spittle coming out of God's mouth when he speaks too hard and too loud, obviously. So forgive me for saying it, but the point is, it's not a literal speech. It's a means of communication. It's a revelation of something that was hidden. That's what speech is. We have thoughts, we have feelings. The only way to communicate on the outside with us is speech. So speech is not blowing air around and moving sounds around. It's what's inside coming out. That's speech. That's how, the Tanya explains it, and it's very reasonable and sensible. So similarly, the same thing, loving kindness, is, to love, basically, you'd have to break it down to a more ethereal thing, that it's, loving is to be close to another. That God comes close to the Jewish people. God comes close to the righteous among the nations, and like that. It's not something, and then, and again, it's not something we can completely comprehend. He's coming close to us in God's form way, or in a way we can't comprehend. He's blessing us. He's, with us. It brings blessing, brings understanding to us, and that's his love. But it's not a love like, it's not a human type love. So whatever human type love is, we can hardly define it ourselves. What is it? It's an impulse to want to be close to another. An impulse to feel happiness being in their presence, and it's an impulse to want them to acknowledge us. But if you say, what is it? Tell me in like 3 words, we wouldn't really know what to say, what it is. But the Rambam, again, as many thinkers in the Middle Ages believe that these feelings were instinctual and lower than intellect. So, and on a certain level, there's a point. Another level there isn't. What he fails to see that, the Chassidus speaks about so much, is that intellect has its limits. And we see those limits, coming into the fray, in modern times since then. But, yeah. Sometimes intellect leads us to do things that, in other words, very often we may, for example, we'll prognosticate about a situation using our minds, and we're totally wrong about it. Oh, it happens all the time. It kind of gets ridiculous already. You watch the news, or I don't know, you talk to people. Everyone is always saying, "Oh no, you can't do that," or "You can do that." Oh, this is going to happen. 90% of the time, people don't know what they're talking about. They're wrong. Maybe it's a little exaggerated. Maybe that's too small. I don't know. But a lot of these things are self-fulfilling prophecies. The more we say, I know this is going to happen, then usually that's what happens, because we're pointing our soul power in a way towards not being able to, or being able to, whatever it is. I know it very well as a lawyer, because, we look at cases and they have to be assessed. Are they going to succeed? They're not going to succeed. And all we can really do is make an educated guess, but we don't really know what would happen if a trial took place. There's so many variables we don't know, and that's exactly why they're often avoided because we just don't know what's going to happen. So the idea, it's interesting because the assumption is, well, because of X, Y, Z in this case, that means that, this is a good case. Reality, we don't really know. I mean, we do know more likely than not. There are, in certain ways, but anyway, my point is simply to bring out the weakness of intellect, that sometimes intellect points us in a certain direction, particularly based on life experiences, that we're just really off base and we could sell ourselves short in terms of what we can accomplish, in terms of, in other words, for example, I'm never going to be able to get married, for example. And that's a very big mitzvah for both the Jew and Noah to try to do. It's a big mitzvah. So many people just, it touches on a lot of emotions too, by the way, so that's another issue. But people may often say, I just don't have X, Y, Z quality people looking for, just not going to happen. You never know. You never know. One thing's for sure, if we don't try, then when it's not going to happen. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Anyway, okay, I've gone off from topic to topic to topic, inside the topic, and then to another topic. So let's see. Let's do number 8. If a person should think that there might be two deities equally uncreated, what would distinguish one from the other, except for their occupying different places at the same time, or the same place at different times? And if you want to say that they occupy different places at the same time, or the same place at different times, they are surely not limitless. Okay, it's similar to the idea of body. If they're filling space, that's already similar enough to a body to say that's not God. It's limited. Again, I always like coming back to the idea that God, he created all these rules of definition. And therefore, of course he's infinite. Because because with him, there's no rules. There's nothing. It's hard to wrap our mind around it. Everything we know is based on some type of a rule or limit or guide. How do I say? Numbers, our bodies, for instance, the limited space, it's something that can be quantified, right? At least to a certain extent. How big we are, how tall we are, the space between us. That doesn't apply to God. But now none of the rules, nothing about our world applies to him. But that's not enough. Nothing about any world applies to him. He's not limited by any bounds of any reality. He is the supra reality. Every reality has to have rules, otherwise there's no way for any entities to exist there. How can you have separate things or anything existing without rules, right? Within our minds, right? Follow the science, people. Follow the science. That's all you have to do. Follow the science. What is science all about? Science is all about the rules governing nature. So if we have a being that's not governed by any rules, we can't define it. It's impossible, right? You could say, well, God can define himself. Maybe he has his own definitions that are not based on anything we can comprehend. I don't know. That's... In our realities, there are rules and things that govern everything, and he doesn't have any of that. That's the bottom line. So, and even in the higher worlds where they're different rules, but there's still rules there too. That's the difference, is that God has no rules. In a certain sense, that's the idea of bringing godliness down to earth, is breaking the rules here and bringing another reality into this world. That's a godly, phenomenon. And we don't notice it because we may not realize it. In other words, there's like a hidden miracle. In other words, a hidden miracle is a relation of God's essential godliness in the way that it's breaking the bounds of the world, but it's hidden. we don't realize that it shouldn't have or couldn't have happened at the moment. And obviously, as looking back, we say, of course this happened, because how else could it be? But no, it shouldn't have. And that's not something we can really realize so well, except, just see the providence of wow, look how that happened. That's unusual. Okay, anyhow. He says, otherwise, the concept of two infinities arises, which is by definition impossible. And this also goes to show of the difficulty with rational thinking, because he's saying here that we can't have two infinities because that's impossible. Yeah, but can't God do the impossible? So sometimes rational, this is all rational inquiry, and our author is quoting, I believe, from Maimonides directly. So it's helpful. Certainly, it's helpful at least to say that within the rules that we know from this world, God is, based on what we know, we can prove that God is infinite. Yes, this is true. But again, in God's reality, there's no rules at all. So can God both make himself infinite and not infinite at the same time? The answer is yes and no, because his light can come down and that can be non-infinite, sort of. But he himself is essentially infinite, meaning, again, boundless. Okay.
Rabbi, is this the idea of, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, the Ein Sof?
Right. The Ein Sof, exactly. The infinite. Without a beginning or without end. Yeah, the word Ein Sof means no end, literally, but it's understood to mean infinite. Okay, paragraph 9. It is explained in the Torah and the prophets that the Holy One, blessed be He, has no body. For it says, because the Lord, He is God in heaven above and on the earth below. And a body cannot be in two places, as it says, because they saw no form. I like that verse better, because they saw no form. And it says, and who is compared or equal to me? And if he had a body, he would be comparable to other bodies. Right. It's interesting that Maimonides, and this author is very busy with this idea that God doesn't have a body, knocking into our heads, God doesn't have a body, doesn't have a body. I mean, I think at this point in Jewish tradition, okay, we get it. Yeah, we know God doesn't have a body. This could be a one-liner. God has no body. Yes. Next case. We all know God doesn't have any body. If he had a body, then I don't know. It's just like the ABCs. If he has a body, it's idolatry. Everybody knows that, right? Certainly a body like a physical body, then that's idolatry. Things that have physical bodies of a desire. So anyhow, it's interesting how he focuses on this point so much, to keep saying that, just making sure you understand that God has no body. So it's 2 paragraphs, almost 3, he's talking about God doesn't have a body. Can't, he's infinite, he doesn't have a body. Okay. Well, again, one of the reasons for this is because the texts talk about God in terms of body parts and bodily functions, and so it becomes important to just no, that's not the case, because the verses keep saying it. God's strong hand, right? God's eyes, God heard, God's nose became hot, right? Vayichar. So again, it's all metaphors. It's not literal. Or another way of saying it is that our hands and our noses are all metaphors. It's not literal. We're not the real nose. We're not the real hand. The real hand is God's hand, whatever that means. And the real nose is God's nose. Ours is just a metaphor. Pay no attention. But seriously, in other words, what I'm saying simply is that the symbolism, so to speak, or the abstract of what our nose does, what our hands do, and so on, is what God does in a much real, deeper, truer sense, a more eternal sense. In other words, our hands help us take action, sometimes very forceful action. God can behave towards his creatures with force. So our hand is only a metaphor, is only a weak, dim comparison to whatever God's hand is in that sense of the word. But if you see a hand literally as a physical form, No, God doesn't have that. So it depends how you understand a hand. See what I'm saying? So if we see things in more symbolic, conceptual terms of what a hand is, then you could say almost God has the true hand and we don't. You can turn it around. Anyway, okay. It's getting late. I think it's the spirit of El has gotten into me, and I'm just taken off and gone off the page more than I'm on the page. So we have like 5 minutes. Is there any comments or questions about any of these off the page discussions that we've been having here? Let me just say this again. I want to focus on this point. What can we take away from any of this? I mean, some of it is clearly repetitive. You've heard it before, particularly the text here about Hashem doesn't have a body. I think it's probably ABC for most people here, about this. So, what's the takeaway? Well, one of the takeaways, as I mentioned before, is the mitzvah to meditate on God, to spend time thinking about his reality, because we don't naturally feel we're in his presence. And there's a need to think about that he is the creator, that everything that exists here, really hidden underneath it is his godly energy, is what brings it into being and keeps it into being constantly. Basically, the Tanya speaks about two levels. There's that level, the first one I just mentioned, which is seeing God in the creation. That's a level every human being can do. And he says there's another level, and the Chassidus explains that really a human being can't really reach this on his own. The other level is called, basically from the Hebrew expression, there's nothing besides him, or literally, there's nothing besides him, meaning that he is so, trying to think of the right word, but there's almost no word for it, but really nothing exists but him. And that really, we don't even really exist. I mean, he's so, what's the word? Awesome, I guess. I mean, I can't think of any other word to describe it. There's no word that can. But he basically, there's only him. There's nothing else. And obviously, a person can't really fully meditate honestly on that point. He says that's a gift from God. That's a gift. To come to that level is a gift from God. And by the way, what is that level? What does that level give rise to? Think about it. Hasidic thought. What is it between these two levels in terms of a human reaction? The first level, person keeps the Torah and its commandments in relation to the world. In other words, without self-sacrifice, with limits. He's relating to the world. In this thing, we have to behave like this, and this like this. Tzitzis has a certain size. I have to eat a certain amount of food, so and so and so on. It's all important. That's very important. Have to have a certain amount of matzah on the Passover Seder for those that have to do that. Whatever it may be, For the Noahide, the simple example of, food amounts is that, if I eat a certain amount of limb of from a living animal, is there a certain, and we actually studied about that, is by Noach, is there the same, olive size requirement for punishment as by a Jew, or those requirements don't exist. I think I may have touched on that point. It's actually a dispute about that. Getting off topic here again. What was I saying? So I wanted to bring out to you that this level where there's nothing else but God brings a person to a point where nothing can stop them in terms of doing God's will, because everything there's no obstructions, because in his mind, the world is just almost an illusion. I mean, the world is almost like not there. I mean, that sounds like this person is, on drugs. He's just not, but that's not what it means. It doesn't mean, but that's what's so incredible about godly, gifts, is that the person is simultaneously has tremendous clarity, but yet not obstructed by anything. So that's a gift. That's a gift. That's a gift. The world doesn't interfere with his service at all, and yet he has tremendous clarity in understanding the world. And that's Eno Novado. There's nothing but him. It's nothing but him. So the person has no other concerns. That's a gift. It's not something a person can come to meditation. So what's meditation about? So it says that level after meditation, God may give that to a person as a gift. That higher level. That's like the level of great tzaddikim. It's not really something, but it's good to know about. It's good to know about because the Tanya goes on to say we should all try to come to that level, even though we'll never really reach it. You see, we should all try. In other words, we should meditate on the idea that everything is like nothing before God, even though we're not going to really believe it deep down, but we should still meditate anyhow. We come to the bed, because we should do what we can do. And who knows, we'll come to some level of understanding, maybe even if it's a little bit right. I like Sandy. That's great. It's like there is no spoon. Yeah, that's pretty much the idea. You can say that that's how tzaddikim were able to perform miracles, because to them, the world isn't even, it's not even there. There's not, in other words, nothing stands before God's will. It's not that God is inside the creation and keeping it alive, and therefore creation has its rules, and God's working within the rules which He created, but nevertheless there are rules. No, there's nothing. Really, the whole world is, before God is nothingness. Before God, it's nothing. So that's why these are important things to think about. But another level is that everyone, according to this, we also have to think about the good that God has done for us, and that He's, first and foremost, as the Tanya says, He's taken us out of Egypt. He's taken every single one of you out of Egypt, just as much as He's taken us, because He's taken you out of the blinders of the different religions and different values, and opened your eyes. This is the spiritual, the eternal going out of Egypt that we do from a Hasidic, Kabbalistic sense every year, every day, every moment. And so we have to thank God for doing that, getting us out. Okay. All right, everyone. Guess it's that time again. Listen, I hope we went a little off topics. We've talked about a lot of good ideas. We went a little bit off. We'll get back and finish the chapter, I'm sure, the next time. I guess it's the time of year. It's the time of year. We should talk more about the 13 attributes, because actually El has to do it. Actually, it says in the works that the 13 attributes shine in El in this month. So that's interesting. You're welcome, everyone. You're very, very welcome. I hope you learned something new. And it's a mitzvah for the Bnei Noach to do, as I said, to think about God. And even in simple terms, just to remind yourself, because we're often, our minds are not on Him, but just to think that He's watching us, right? I place God before me always, right? There's some joke between a teacher and a student where the student left the teacher, and I get this joke wrong all the time. See if I can get it straight this time. But so the student, the teacher said to the student, "Why did you leave me? Why did you go to that other teacher?" So the student said, "The reason I went to the other teacher is because the other teacher told me how to read minds." So he said, "Really?" He said, "Yes, yeah, try me, test it out." So he said, "Okay." So the student said, "You think a thought, teacher, and I will read your mind." So the teacher agreed. "Okay, fine. I'm going to think a thought right now." The student said, "You're thinking I place God before me always." The teacher said, "That's not what I was thinking." He said, "That's why you're not my teacher anymore." That was a joke. So But that's the point. It's the first commandment, or the first thing mentioned in the Code of Jewish Law, is to place God before us always, to know He's watching our actions, and He's always there. It's not, and I think going together with it is always having something that Rabbi Nachman of Breslov mentions all the time, having the idea of the world to come always before our eyes. At the very least, the point is to really, this is high levels, but this is, to help a person pass all the tests of life. It is really so important to realize that everything around us, right, that really the main life is really spiritual and comes from God. And so following His commandments, we're living. Not following His commandments is death. And that's why meditating on that God is a real reality, and that the real reality is the souls, and so on and so on, helps a person, materialize, to borrow that term, to make it real in front of them, that this is really first and the other is last. To turn his sense of cognizance about the world upside down. We see the physical and we talk about spiritual, and it's not really, it's something we talk about, not something, it's hard to really think we really believe in it. Let's turn that upside down, where we really believe in the spiritual, and the physical we realize is just passing, and it's only lives because of the spiritual inside of it, and that's it. And so those are some of the things to meditate during this month about, and to help us, do the right thing, no matter what circumstance, no matter what life might bring us.